the most dangerous and cold-hearted Hells Angels member ever. Through violence and intimidation, Maurice "Mom" Boucher became Montreal's drug kingpin and used his position as a Hells Angels leader to force other drug dealers to submit to his will or die. He was born in 1953 into poverty, one of 8 children from a brutal, alcoholic father and a mother who tried to hold her family together. Boucher's father worked in construction, an industry that was ruled by the Mafia. In a society where corruption was accepted as normal, he learned early on that using violence and the threat of it brought about the outcomes he desired. He dropped out of school in grade 9 and was already a heavy drinker and a drug addict. Crime fueled his addictions, but he didn't seem to have been very good at it. He was released in 1974 while in the process of robbing a grocery store. Martin Pellerin, a police psychologist, said he was ambitious with a strong desire to be rich, but with no inclination to work. The pre-sentence report described Boucher as reaching his hour of choice. He could clean up his act and work in construction or go deeper into a life of crime. He chose to go deeper into crime. An armed robbery landed him a prison term of 40 months. Mixing with other criminals, he learned to hone his skills as a crook. In the early 1980s, Boucher hitched up with the SS, a white supremacist motorcycle gang. The group pulled off a variety of crimes and the name Maurice Boucher started to show up on police radar, but the cops judged him to be nothing special, pretty much an ordinary outlaw biker. The group's main activity seems to have been beating up non-white immigrants until they also started to move into drug dealing. Internal squabbling saw 5 Hells Angels killed in what became known as the Lennoxville Massacre. Boucher moved into the leadership vacuum and started rebuilding the gang. He created a new group within the Angels called the Nomads. Aspiring Nomad members had to commit a murder to qualify. This was to ensure that no undercover police officers could infiltrate the club. In 1994, following the arrest of Salvatore Cazzetta on charges of conspiring to import 200 kilos of cocaine, the Rock Machine was rendered temporarily leaderless. Boucher, by now president of the Montreal chapter of the Hells Angels, decided to make his move against the Rock Machine and other independent dealers. His ultimate aim was to establish a Hells Angels monopoly over street-level, biker gang drug dealing in the Montreal area and eventually all of Quebec. Boucher had the 2 Hells Angel puppet clubs, the Evil Ones and the Rockers, to start moving into markets controlled by the Rock Machine. Boucher persuaded Rock Machine-controlled bars and their resident drug dealers to surrender their illegal drug business or their resistance would lead to bloodshed. On 14th July 1994, 2 members of the Hells Angels' top puppet club, the Rockers, entered a downtown motorcycle shop and shot down a Rock Machine associate. This would be the spark that would set off the Quebec Biker War. During the Quebec Biker War, the Angels' national president, Vladimir Walter the Nugget Stadnik, remained in the background, while Boucher became the public face of the Angels, to the extent that Stadnik's name was almost never mentioned by the media. In 1984, Stadnik was involved in an incident when he drove his Harley-Davidson motorcycle into a car driven by a Catholic priest, causing a fire that left him with severe burns and a hideously deformed face. Given that Stadnik did not speak French and his grotesquely deformed face was as far from being telegenic as possible, the Quebec media preferred to focus on the charismatic French-Canadian Boucher. In what appeared to be a division of labor, Stadnik was in charge of expanding the Angels into Ontario and the Prairies while bringing the Angel chapters in British Columbia, which answered to the Hells Angels chapter in Seattle, under the control of the Montreal chapter, while Boucher had the task of fighting the Quebec Biker War. As Stadnik spoke no French and Boucher no English, police wiretaps showed that the 2 men needed interpreters to communicate. In the summer of 1994, Boucher first met Stéphane Gagné. Gagné, a grade 7 dropout from the same Hochelaga Maisonneuve neighborhood of Montreal that Boucher came from, was a longtime drug dealer and thief who met Boucher while walking down Sherbrooke Street and agreed to buy his drugs from the Hells Angels. Boucher spoke to Gagne in his usual foul-mouthed code language, supplemented by his various hand gestures, and the meeting ended with Gagne pointing to his nose, meaning he wanted to buy cocaine, and then touching Boucher's arm, meaning he wanted to buy the cocaine from him, leading Boucher to point at a rocker who was with him, Paul Fontaine, meaning that Gagne was now working for Fontaine. Boucher, in his drive to monopolize the drug trade, took on not only the Rock Machine, but other groups such as the Pelletier clan, which served to escalate the violence as most of the drug dealers of Montreal banded together to found an alliance against the Angels. On 17 October 1994, Danny Kane, a rocker and a protege of Boucher's Lieutenant David Wolf Carroll, contacted Interpol's office in Ottawa, saying he knew much about the Angels and wanted to sell information. The Interpol office had Kane meet Staff Sergeant Jean-Pierre Levesque of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who appointed Corporal Pierre Verdun and Sergeant Gaetan Saint-Onge to be his handlers. At their first meeting on 4th November 1994, Kane told Verdun that Boucher was a very dangerous man who was much feared by the other Angels, who was planning to murder anyone and everyone who might oppose him in his plans to take over the drug trade in Quebec. Kane worked as an RCMP informer from 1994 to 1997, and again from 1999 to 2000, and his weekly reports to Verdun are the main source of information about Boucher's actions during the Quebec Biker War. Kane was leading a double life in more than one sense, as the ostensibly straight Kane was having a secret relationship with another rocker, A.M. Simard. Early efforts to shut down the biker gangs had been influential in part because Quebec's justice system was notoriously corrupt. A joint task force involving the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Ontario Provincial, and the Sûreté de Quebec was set up. A couple of informers cut deals for leniency in exchange for snitching on the bikers. On March 28, 2001, a massive police swoop took place. 2,000 police officers were deployed to round up 139 Hells Angels and their associates. Maurice Boucher was among those arrested. After a massive trial, 9 bikers were handed long prison sentences for crimes such as conspiracy to commit murder, gangsterism, and drug trafficking. But the raid and subsequent imprisonments only caused a slight setback in the criminal activities of the Hells Angels. New recruits joined the ranks, and it was back to the narcotics trade as before. Boucher was convicted of conspiracy to murder in the case of the 2 prison guards and received a life sentence with no possibility of parole for 25 years. In prison, Boucher's life of violence continued, passing messages through his daughter during prison visits. He ordered the killing of rivals in the criminal underworld. He also became a target himself. A contract was put out for him to be killed in prison. In October 2010, acting on orders from Danny Wolf, the leader of the Indian Posse, a member of that group wounded Boucher in a knife attack. 5 years later, Boucher and another man were charged with attempting to murder a fellow inmate. In 2015, Boucher was diagnosed with cancer. The disease, rather than his criminal enemies, killed him in July 2022. Let us know your views in the comments section, and don't forget to show your support by engaging with this video and sharing it with others. For more such content, do subscribe to our channel.